We are looking tonight at the story of Deborah in Judges chapter 4 and 5. I'm sorry I didn't get the mail out that message out to everybody before I did. I wrote it early this morning and then just forgot to hit send for some reason. So anyway, my dad who said I didn't get a link, and I was like, oh, come on, old man, and you're killing me here. And then I realized that it was my fault. It wasn't his. It wasn't him. So anyway, so apologize for that. I hope you had a chance to read at least some of Judges 4 and 5 if you aren't already familiar with the story. As we look at this story of Deborah and Jael. Jael also is a pretty key character in the story. Actually, Laura suggested that we look at Deborah. She said she had not ever really spent much time with the story of Deborah, and so I thought, well, if she hasn't, then probably a lot of us haven't. So I thought we would take a look at this story together and just kind of get through it, work through it. So if you read it, what are some things you noticed just right off the bat? Judges 4 and 5. What are some things that just stood out to you right from the start? I'm sorry, Linda, you're kind of breaking up on me there. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I was just saying that God chose her and the judge over Israel's people.
Yeah, I'm still getting some. Maybe it's on my end. I'm still getting.
Try to use your audio, Linda.
I heard you say God chose Deborah and that's kind of a key moment in this story, that a key part of this story, that God chooses Deborah.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. So we're definitely going to talk some about that. And what else? God chooses Deborah. God picked her for this role that she has.
Well, that's how unusual it is for a woman, okay, to be chosen for this. And then also I'm struck by how I don't know if you would say deferential the leader of the army is. That if unless you go with me, I'm not going. So he must have known that God was with her.
It's interesting. I mean, we read the story and we kind of think, well, that's unusual. Barak doesn't seem to think it's all that unusual, and that's one of the interesting things to me about this story. Barak does not seem to think this is at all unusual. Deborah, and maybe we need to back up and just point, Deborah is a prophet. And that's important. That's central to this story. Deborah is a prophet. Elijah was a prophet, Samuel was a prophet, Deborah was a prophet. And if we put an asterisk by that, it's kind of really because that's just sort of the lenses with which we read the text, because the text just says Deborah was a prophet. It does emphasize that she was a woman, but she was a prophet. She does the kinds of things that Samuel does. She is a prophet. She brings messages to Israel, and she judges Israel. Now, what does that mean? Now, we're in the book of Judges, right? What does it mean that she judges Israel? Or actually, the NIV just says she leads Israel. She was leading Israel at that time, but that word is she was judging Israel at that time. What does that mean? That she's
It says
judging-
right in the text in verse 5 that
Yeah.
she held court under the palm of Deborah, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided.
She held court. She now, probably a regional kind of thing. I don't know how far people would have come, but she sits there in this central location, this probably well-traveled location, and she judges disputes. She judges cases, which means all kinds of things. What does that imply to you? That Deborah is the one to whom people come to have these cases decided?
Well, like a judge today, they have authority,
Okay, she had authority.
heavy authority.
What kind of authority?
Well,
What kind of authority does she have?
would have been settled according to the law, right? So I don't know, I would think she would be very unusual being educated in the law, because I mean, weren't most women not able to go to school or have an education the way men would be able to?
I mean, probably not a lot of men in Deborah's day either. I mean, this is
true.
not even Jesus's time where there was the synagogue and, kids could go to the synagogue and learn. This is probably not even a lot of men would have been that familiar with the law. I'm not entirely sure, that her authority rested on knowing the law, though, I mean, probably it did. I think her authority rests on the fact that she's a prophet. God has called her to this mission, and God, does God help her in deciding these cases? Has God given her wisdom to decide? I can't answer that. I don't know. But she has this authority because people trust her. People give her this authority. They come to her knowing they're going to get a fair decision. They're going to get a decision that's just, that's righteous, all these things that God kind of has as the bare minimum for how you treat one another. She's going to give them a judgment that is fair and right.
Yeah.
So they have this trust in her.
I was thinking, Pat, maybe she was like Abraham Lincoln, who was a self-taught lawyer.
Okay, maybe.
He did go to school later, but he was basically self-taught. He just studied all the time, got all the law books he could get his hands on, became one of the most famous lawyers in our country and eventually president. So there are people like that who can do it.
But the point you're making, Patrick, is a good one, which is that in our society, we think of judges as getting their authority from the central government, from being appointed, and thus, even if you disagree with the judge, well, they're there, you have to honor it because they're part. There is no government, right? Yeah. There is no central government. So
what's the line in Judges? Excuse me, Ron. What's the line in Judges? Every person did what he thought right. It's this sort of, it's the Wild West. It's just sort of a frontier kind of mentality. Go ahead.
So in legal terms, I mean, there is an area of law that is similar to this, which is international law, which is defined as the customary practices of nations. And basically it is just the respect that Deborah holds among the people is what gives her resolutions of disputes authority. Now, that's probably enhanced because they do feel like she has a channel to God, but nonetheless, she is respected. That's why the people come to her. It's not because of some explicit appointment or anything.
Right, exactly right. There's respect, this trust is there, and the people come to her because. So I just want to point that out to begin. That we're not talking about somebody. One of the ways that sometimes I've read this story and I've heard others read it is, well, none of the men stepped up, so they had to go to a woman. That's not really the way the text presents this. it starts out with Deborah is a prophet. God has called her. And somebody mentioned the law, and and the priesthood comes into that. The priesthood, how did you get to be a priest? What's the career path?
Another one.
Okay. I mean, you have to be a Levite. You have to be a specific subset of Levites. It's a genetic call. You're by ancestry. Prophet is somebody that God chooses specifically, right? And God has chosen Deborah specifically and placed his spirit upon her, and all that's entailed, that is entailed by being a prophet. Deborah has that. And I just think that's important to note, because we can sometimes read this as though Deborah is God's second choice because the men aren't doing anything, and that's not the way the text.
Patrick, I don't know if it's just me, but you're broken up quite a bit. I don't know if we all should probably put mics on mute so we can
I
hear you,
can't hear.
It may
because there's a lot of feedback going on.
I wonder if is that me or is that?
I'm not
be
sure,
that.
but we can hardly hear you.
I think I see it.
And so if we can all go on mute, maybe, I'm not sure.
Got it. I think I got it. I could see it.
The speaker.
I can see it. I can see. I think I got it.
Sounds
So-
better.
Yeah. So I think we're okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm not going to try to repeat all that, but I think everybody got the gist. And so yeah. Oh, go ahead, Christy.
You alluded to it, but I think it's worth mentioning that yes, she is. We know she's a woman in the scripture, but it's an important part of the story. But the Bible doesn't say, and let me tell you about the time when we had a woman prophet. I mean, it's not, that's part of the story, but they're not. The people around don't seem to treat it as big a deal as we do. I'm not saying we shouldn't pay attention to it, but this isn't the amazing time when they let a woman do it.
Right. It's not treated as a novelty, I think.
At least in the storytelling mode of the story, anyway.
It's not treated as a novelty. One of the reasons for that might be, somebody named Miriam, right? Miriam was a prophet. So I mean, we're not like out of the stream of tradition here at all with a woman as a prophet. Miriam was a prophet. Miriam was a well-known prophet. People knew all about Miriam, right? So it's not as unusual as we might think. There are other female prophets. And
the importance of Deborah, I mean, we're not very far into the story, but we're about as far as we need to go to draw some very important conclusions, which is, I think, that it is not fundamentally abhorrent to God to speak through a woman.
Right.
It is not fundamentally abhorrent to God for a woman to exercise a leadership role over his people. It is not fundamentally abhorrent in a marriage for the woman to have a leadership role where the husband apparently does not. And these are things that Deborah, if God is the same, right, from beginning to end, then Deborah marks those principles as things that we have to respect and realize. And so the importance of Deborah in terms of women roles, how they're viewed by God, is incredibly important. Just those few verses mark, even if she hadn't done anything else, those things are really key.
at the risk of repeating myself, a priest was, chosen by birth. By God chose Deborah by putting His Spirit upon her to be a prophet. That's
And I think
worth
that, and that keeps in line with the fact that who God uses is not about gender, it's about who has His heart and who will expand this message and point back to Him. And I was reading, and I think I shared with you a while back, Patrick, about Bema, and I was studying through some of that just the other day, and he was talking about God is eager about His message continuing. And sometimes it falls in the hand of someone, and supposedly they look like the one that should do it, for example, like Saul. But as soon as they shift the narrative away from what God would have the narrative to be, He's going to put the cause in the hand of the person that will do it. And in these first couple of verses, that's what it's kind of saying, that Israel had turned back to evil. And so God's goal is always to get us turning back to Him. And I don't think it's a gender issue that we have made it one, but it's about who can best do that.
And that brings up the background of this that we do need to talk about a little bit. We're in this cycle in the Judges, right? Where Israel sins and God lets one of these, and think about the political situation is basically there are all these city states and all these alliances around Israel as they've come into the promised land, and they've taken some of those cities, they've driven out some of those people, but not all of them. And so there are threats kind of from every side, opposing people who kind of take it personally that Israel has come into their land and is trying to displace them. And so as Israel goes through this cycle of turning away from God, God raises up one of these city states, one of these tribal groups, one of these groups of people to oppose them and to subjugate them and to tyrannize them and oppress them. And that goes on until Israel finally cries out to God and God raises up a judge. And so that's the cycle that we're in, right? And you see that in verse 1 of chapter 4, Israelites did evil. The Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. He's not the king of all of Canaan. Probably it's better translated something like a king in Canaan, or something along those lines. He's one of these kings of one of these city states, but he's been raised up by God. God sold them into the hands of Jabin and his commander Sisera. Sisera has 900. The King James Version famously says 900 iron chariots, and that's actually a very literal translation. It's probably not, though, chariots literally made of iron. That would be a ton of iron and a lot of work. It's probably chariots with iron bindings on the wheels to make them stronger, to make them more able to handle rough terrain. Chariots are sort of the tanks of this time. So imagine you're out, you're fighting, and the way to fight is it's just infantry, right? You've got people with swords, people with spears, whatever, and you got these 900 chariots rolling through. They must have seemed indestructible, and they can move soldiers around, and they can provide a base for archers, I suppose. And so it's just this. It's a rough thing. So they're under this domination from this king, and this is when Deborah sends for Barak, verse 6, son of Abinoam from Kedesh and Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands." That's the message that she has for Barak. What does Barak say?
You go with me, I'll go.
Yeah, the deal is you go too, Deborah. Now let's pause a minute and think about that. What does that say to you?
You should hear God, close to God. You need to go too.
Yes, I mean this is. I think he knows his history. In the Exodus, Moses would show up at a battle and they'd win. When they went out to battle without Moses, without the Ark of the Covenant, they lost. And so Barak is just saying, I want the prophet with me. I want the prophet with me. And we sometimes portray this as something maybe it's not. It's true that Deborah says to him, okay, but just know you won't get the glory. God is going to give Sisera into the hands of a woman because you've asked me to go with you. This is odd because to ask a woman to go to the battlefield, that's not typical. But I don't think it shows weakness on Barack's now I want to call him Barack because of Barack Obama. Isn't that funny? I've called him Barak all my life, but now because of Barack Obama, I want to call him Barack. Anyway, whatever you call him, Barak, Barack. He's not portrayed as weak exactly. Barak is in Hebrews 11. Deborah doesn't get mentioned. Jael doesn't get mentioned, but Barak does. So it's not like Barak is a failure because of this. And I want to notice that the Bible does not say Barak was wrong to ask her. The Bible says, because you're asking Deborah, a woman will get the glory and not you. Barak, by the way, seems absolutely fine with that, right? that doesn't seem to bother Barak at all. He's fine and dandy with that. I will go with you, says Deborah, but because of the course you're taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Zebulun and Naphtali. Zebulun and Naphtali are the tribes that are mentioned specifically. Probably a lot of things that happened in Judges were kind of local things. It probably wasn't all of Israel being oppressed by this one guy. It was probably sort of local, tribal sorts of things. And so Zebulun and Naphtali are the tribes that are most affected, apparently, though in chapter 5, we see some other tribes also mentioned. And Deborah goes up. And now we switch to this Heber the Kenite. Kenites were the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law. And so it pictures this, Heber and his family and his associates at this campsite. And verse 12, when they told Sisera, so the implication seems to be that Heber and his family are sort of allied with Sisera in some way. And they give Sisera this information, and Sisera summons all his men, and that it plays perfectly into the hands, plays perfectly into Deborah's message, because Deborah's message from God was, I will lead Sisera right to you, and you'll be able to destroy it. And so Deborah says to Barak, go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariots and fled on foot. Verse 16 says that all Sisera's troops fell by the sword, not a man was left. So it's an overwhelming win. However, Sisera gets away and finds himself where?
Tent of Jael.
At the tent of Jael and this previously mentioned Heber's campsite. And Jael, Sisera thinks he's got he's come to a place where he can hide and rest and be safe. And Jael certainly makes that seem the case, right? Come, my Lord, come right in. Don't be afraid. So he entered her tent and she covered him with a blanket. I'm thirsty, he said. Please give me some water. She opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. So she didn't give him water. She gives him more than he asked for, right? stand in the doorway of the tent, he told her. If someone comes by and asks you, is anyone in there? Say no. But what does Jael do? Let's say Jael is good with a tent peg and a hammer, right?
Well, the song later is pretty blunt. It says she murdered him.
She murdered, exactly. She murdered, and the descriptive words, she crushed his head, she pierced his head. I mean, there's, it's very, very graphic. It's very, 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 quite gut wrenching. She murders him. She while he's asleep, she drives the stake through his head, and in the understatement of the year, the text says, and he died.
Oh my goodness, who is this woman?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a reasonable question. Who is this woman? Well, we don't know much about her, really. I mean, this is kind of what we know of Jael. Interestingly, Jael has kind of caught the imagination of a lot of artists. There's a ton. I mean, for her few verses that she has in Judges, there are a ton of paintings of Jael, and they're all sort of it's still sort of interesting to just sort of look through and see what was in these artists' minds as they painted Jael. It runs the gamut from everything you can imagine and then some, probably.
Well, I'll just mention she's not alone, because in the Apocrypha, there's Judith
and Holofernes, yes.
Yes, who does basically about the same thing, except she sort of seduces him to kill him. So, watch the
women. Your wife is going to make you sleep on the couch tonight. I mean, it's an interesting little story. It grabs our attention, obviously. Here in this story, it serves to just sort of round off the narrative, right? It just sort of brings it to this fitting conclusion. Deborah has
it fulfills the prophecy too.
Yeah, exactly. Deborah has said this is what's going to happen, and that's exactly what happens. He comes into a tent where he thinks he's found a friend, and he meets a tent peg. So it's a really interesting story and one of the more interesting stories of how judges deliver Israel, and they do it in all sorts of ways, and sometimes it's not even the judge themselves that does it specifically. It's actually a lot of the same words are used as the story of Ehud. If you remember Ehud, he's the left-handed guy that sort of slipped a sword into an audience with King Eglon, and then slipped a sword into King Eglon, and the big fat guy, and so actually a lot of the language is similar between those two accounts. So I don't know if that's intentional or not, but. And it just says, verse 23, then on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites. I love the way these things sometimes get summarized. God subdued Jabin. All of this happened because God was at work. And one of the things that I take away from this is God works through so many different people in so many different ways to do what he intends. And sometimes the people he works through are not the people we would expect. And sometimes they are. And I think we have to be very humble and very expectant that God will surprise us sometimes in the way he carries out his will in the world. And Deborah is sensitive to that. Deborah is aware of that. She knows that God is at work, but he's at work in the people. And we'll kind of look at that in just a second as we look at the song in chapter 5. But she sees God's work in all of this, even though Barak is involved, she's involved, Jael's involved, all sorts of people, nameless soldiers are involved. All of this circles around God's purpose, which was to subdue Jabin before the Israelites, to let Israel know that he's still there. He's always been there. And when they are, when their fortunes have gone south, it's likely because they've forgotten him. And he's the power of this. So then chapter 5. On that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. And this is a really interesting, just apropos of nothing, but you might find it interesting. A lot of Old Testament scholars would say that this is one of the oldest pieces of text in the Old Testament. And there's all sorts of theories as to how the Old Testament came into being, in the form that we have it, and I don't think you can know their theories because they're impossible to prove. But based on grammar, based on words, based on structure, a lot of Old Testament scholars would say that this song is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, piece of text in the Old Testament. I don't know if that means anything or not, but it's just sort of interesting to me. And it begins with this idea that God is at work in people. Verse 2 says, when the princes in Israel, leaders, take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord. It begins with this celebration of what can happen when people listen to God and offer themselves to his purposes, and when they can do that together. And it just, it's like, he says, the song begins, when the princes of Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, and then it's like you can't even finish the thought. It's just, praise the Lord. It's wonderful when it happens. It's worthy of praise when it happens. I will sing to the Lord. I'll praise the Lord, the God of Israel, in song. In verse 4, there's this picture of God going out from Seir, marching from the land of Edom. The idea being that God is coming to deal with Jabin. He's coming to deal with Jabin and all his iron chariots. And when God comes in that way in judgment, the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water, the mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. And then it tells us a little bit about the setting, right? In the days of Shamgar, another judge, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned, travelers took to winding paths, villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose, until I rose, a mother in Israel. I really like that phrase, a mother in Israel. What does that mean to you? Deborah is a mother in Israel.
She's the queen.
She's the queen, okay. I mean, in a way, yeah, okay. What else?
Takes care of Israel.
Takes care of Israel. Yeah. There's that sense of nurturing, right? Protection, safety. But it's not just that either, I don't think. I mean, that's there. But I was thinking sometimes it's moms that say, you can do this, you can do this, you can go get this done. Just stand up and go do what you need to do. And that's what she does, right? With Barak, with the armies, go do this. Let's go do this. God has said it's going to happen. We can trust it. He's faithful. And let's go and embrace what he has for us to do. Let's go and embrace our purposes. God chose new leaders when war came to the city gates, but not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. They're way under equipped, I think is the takeaway there. My heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. Praise the Lord. You who ride on white donkeys, sitting on your saddle blankets, you who walk along the road. Consider the voice of the singers at the watering places. They recite the victories of the Lord, the victories of his villagers in Israel. And the Lord, then the people of the Lord went down to the city gates. Wake up, Deborah, wake up, break out in song. Arise, Barak, take captive your captives, son of Abimelech. The remnant of the nobles came down. The people of the Lord came down to me against the mighty. Some came from Ephraim, whose roots were in Amalek. He goes through some tribes, and we have Naphtali and Zebulun mentioned in chapter 4, but in chapter 5, there's a few others mentioned. Some came from Ephraim, Benjamin, from other places. Some came. Princes of Issachar were with Deborah and with Barak. In the districts of Reuben, though, there was much searching of the heart. Why did you stay among the sheep pens to hear the whistling for the flock? So the idea is not all the tribes stepped up as they should have, but some did. Reuben wasn't so sure. Gilead stayed behind. Dan lingered. Asher remained on the coast and stayed in his coves. Verse 19, kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought at Taanach by the waters of Megiddo. They took no plunder of silver. From the heavens, the stars fought. So the picture is right. They're coming together. The soldiers are clashing, but the stars are fighting as well against Sisera. And the river Kishon swept them away. The age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. Then thundered the horses' hooves. Galloping, galloping go his mighty steeds. And so the picture is of the Kishon River sort of maybe even overflowing its banks and creating this mire for the chariots, sort of like what happened at the Red Sea with Moses. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water and she gave him milk, and a bowl fit for nobles. She brought him curdled milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera. It's actually her right hand for the workman's hammer, and she hammered Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank. In Hebrew, I'm not going to try to do it, but in Hebrew, there's this rhythm with this. It's like repetition and rhythm all through this, which is why it sounds kind of odd in English. But there's this repetition and rhythm all through this section. At her feet he sank. He fell. There he lay. At her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. So very poetic. It reminds you, doesn't it? Does me of the song that is sung at the Red Sea after the victory of the Red Sea in Exodus 14. There's a song in Exodus 15, and it's a very similar, and I think intentionally so, a very similar comparison here. Let me pause there. Thoughts, questions, things that pop up to you that you want to mention. What do songs do for us that just reading the story doesn't do? Why do you think we have a song describing this right after the narrative that describes it?
It's easier to memorize.
Do you want me to take it off mute?
You can.
What's that?
The song.
Remember, for one thing, because I can't remember every verse that I have read, but put it on 80s on 8 and I know every line of every song.
Yeah,
So I think it helps us to process it and remember it and to kind of play it over in our minds.
Laura used to say she was going to make up lyrics for the grocery list so that I would remember what to get. That's probably not a bad idea. Songs are memorable. They are. They communicate in ways that stick with us. And again, if we were Hebrew speakers, the rhythm, the meter, the sounds of the words would reinforce. The horses are Literally, it says, galloping, they galloped, and the words kind of sound like a horse galloping. So, yeah, there's this, it's very memorable. It sticks with us.
In musical theater, when the emotion either gets too high or too low, the characters stop talking and they start singing. So it's kind of like you're talking and you can't express it anymore with words. You have to express it in song. So it's almost a change in emotion if you're reading it, straight through.
Yeah. I'm really glad this song is here. I've got to admit, there have been times in my life where I've read chapter 4 and then started reading chapter 5 and been like, it's just a song about this and skip over it. But the song really, in a lot of ways, it reinforces the sort of feelings that come up as you're reading. It reminds us, it connects on a way that you just can't through just the narrative.
Well, except it doesn't, right? I mean, it's what you just said. This is one of the problems of reading in translation.
Yeah.
We don't get the song.
Yeah.
We don't. You've been saying, well, this is what the meter is in Hebrew, and unfortunately, I mean, in Hebrew, it's mainly about concept being contrasted and harmonized, and rhythm. It's not about rhyming. And so, unfortunately, I mean, the whole point of the song we've just said is to remember it, which means it's there so the Jews remembered Deborah and Barak. And unfortunately, when we read, we just leap over it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really appeal to us, and it's got all these tribes and we don't really know who these people are and all this type of stuff. So it's almost undermines, unfortunately, what it actually would have done throughout most of history. The big point about this song is it's taking more room. Space means importance in storytelling. And when you have a song, like Jade said, that's even to emphasize it further, to drive it home, like the tent peg, I guess. And which all goes to say that the example of Deborah and the story of Deborah was something that people were to remember. But I don't think many Christians remember Deborah, which is sort of sad, because Deborah is important, as we've been talking about.
But it doesn't make good flannel graphs.
No.
No, it does not.
Well, actually, once you got to about 6th grade and you got to do this story, I mean, this was a big story.
Yeah.
I mean, this was great.
What was it, Mom? 5th or 6th grade, we had the Sunday school class, and it was the judges. And the two stories I remember best were Ehud and Deborah. Because I mean, you've got, you're in 5th or 6th grade, penetrating injuries are big. I don't know. That's really
we're into violence.
Resonate with you or something. But yeah, I mean, those stuck with me. We do have in the story that we don't have in the song, that we don't have in the narrative part, and that's this very imaginative scene where Sisera's mother is waiting for him to come home. And this is really interesting to me. So let me just read it, and then I want to see what you think. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice, she cried out, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of his chariots delayed?" The wisest of her ladies answered her. Indeed, she keeps saying to herself, "Are they not finding and dividing the spoils? A woman or two for each man. Colorful garments as plunder for Sisera. Colorful garments embroidered, highly embroidered garments for my neck. All this is plunder." What do you think? What does that do? I'm curious.
Well, I actually, this is, I guess more like a footnote than the point of the story. But I was thinking about this in the context of our last study. And these kinds of stories we all here are quite used to because it's God's people and it's God. And of course, God's in charge. But people who are struggling with faith or are new to it, I mean, I heard someone say the best way to make someone not believe is reading the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I mean, God made these people too,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so I understand why they sang it, but I don't have, it's not in my nature to win battles in the same way it was at that time. And so I understand that struggle when people read it and say, wait a minute, God, let these people completely wipe out these other people. And we got to leave it to God. I get that. But just as a footnote to what we were talking about before, those of us who are used to it, I think we need to run that through our brain a little bit. And I think that might be a good example of it, the part you just brought up. I mean, she lost her son, you know?
It kind of humanizes Sisera a little bit. Two things. And again, I think it kind of serves to sort of round things off because we started with a mother in Israel, right? We started with Deborah, the mother in Israel, and we end with the mother of Israel's enemy. And she's waiting for him to come home, like mothers do, you know, they're waiting, worried for her son to come home from all this fighting that's happening. So it does sort of humanize things a little bit, right up until the point where she says, they're dividing the spoils, a woman or two for each man, except she doesn't say woman. The word is uterus. I think intending to mean a little more of the reproductive system than just that. And I think it's just this sort of graphic reference to, you know, this is what the women that he's taking captive are to him.
In Deborah and Barak's vision.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Now, right now, I don't know that Sisera actually had a mother who said these things, but that certainly in their song, this is the way they see it. So, you know, it kind of is a contrast, I think, in a lot of ways, to the way that Israel, at their best, you know, a woman is a prophet. A woman is used by God. A woman is an instrument of him to deliver his people. She's respected. She's appreciated. She's loved. She's a mother in Israel. And then, you know, on the other hand, there's this other view that the Bible sort of recognizes is there, and certainly is there in Judges. I mean, this isn't the only story in Judges where you sort of have a picture of women being abused. But I just, it's just sort of an interesting way to sort of round things off. And then you get down to the bottom. So may all your enemies perish, Lord, but may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength.
Well, and let's point out here too, the ending here is sort of a bookmark to the extent that some people would say Deborah was doing unwomanly things, which I think we've said we have to rethink that. This ending actually calls us to rethink it even more, because Sisera's mother has done the womanly thing. She's passive, she's sitting there, she's waiting, she's talking to her ladies, you know, this, that, and the other. And she's the one who is disappointed. I mean, it's all about the women, these two chapters. The focus is on women and different roles that women take. And the surprising women turn out to be the women of God who are doing what God wants. The woman who is doing the womanly thing actually is the one who loses in this thing.
Chrissy, you mentioned the difficulty with the war and the God directing his people to exterminate all these other people. And I can, the only thing I can do is in these stories is turn back to the idea that they're not just, Israel's not fighting these people just because they're Israel's enemies. There's this overlap, right? There's they're God's enemies, and they're Israel's enemies because they're God's enemies in the way that this takes shape. The danger, of course, is that we assume that anybody who is my enemy is God's enemy, and certainly we've done that in history repeatedly. But here it seems to be the case, and it's a universal kind of thing. May all your enemies perish, Lord. Maybe the implication being whoever they might be, wherever they might be from. And may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. And again, maybe the implication is whoever they are and wherever they might be from. And we certainly see that some in the Old Testament too. We see people who aren't of Israel, but are favored by God and treated well by God and treated well by Israel's people, by Israel. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed walking through. Deborah, any other last minute? We were running late, but last minute thoughts or comments? We'll pick up. All right. Well, thank you for. Oh, yes.
That is the last we hear of Deborah, right?
Yeah. Barak is in Hebrews 11. He's mentioned in Hebrews 11, but Deborah doesn't get a mention for some reason. I'm a little puzzled by that, but anyway. Yeah. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Hope you all have a good week.
Thank you. So Ron and Chrissy, are you guys?
Good night,
Ron and
all.
Chrissy, are
Good
you
night,
can?
everyone.
Ron and
what?
Chrissy,
Are
are
we
you
what?
guys playing? Are you can? Because you have the last name.
Yes. Husband and wife.
Okay.
We're just in two different rooms.
Okay. Got it.
We're in the same house though.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, darling. Have a good night.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Hey, you too. Bye.
See you, Linda. See you, Ron. See you, Christy. See you, Alan. Have a good week.